Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We are speaking to you today from the Coast Salish People's Traditional Territories, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I'd like to thank the Canadian Travel and Tourism Roundtable for bringing together a group of Vancouver business and Indigenous tourism leaders. Today, we are calling on the federal government to urgently remove pre-departure testing for fully vaccinated travelers by April 1st so that tourism can fully resume this spring and summer. While the federal government's updated travel measures brought Canada one step closer to reopening the travel and tourism industry, in requiring pre-departure rapid antigen tests, the government missed an opportunity to align with other international jurisdictions that have removed pre-departure test requirements for fully vaccinated travelers. The pandemic and available science have evolved, and so should measures to keep Canadians safe while allowing the travel and tourism industry to reopen. The COVID-19 pandemic and resulting economic crisis have made for an incredibly challenging business environment. Businesses are dealing with significant issues such as labor shortages, supply chain issues, and increased debt taken on during the pandemic. The economic impacts of the pandemic will remain with us for some time and require a concerted effort by the government to support business and chart a path to higher long-term growth and economic prosperity. Today, I am joined by business and Indigenous tourism leaders who are urgently asking the government to remove unnecessary pre-departure tests for fully vaccinated travelers by April 1st. This is critical to ensure the survival of travel and tourism businesses in our region and across the country. I'd like to invite now Keith Henry, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada, to speak.
I want to start by acknowledging as well the territory of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh people here that we're on. I also want to thank the Canadian Travel and Tourism Roundtable for hosting us here this morning. COVID-19 has had a profound impact on a variety of sectors in Canada. However, perhaps none have been impacted more acutely than the travel and tourism sector. Like all facets of the Canada's travel industry, Indigenous tourism has been hit especially hard. In 2019, Indigenous tourism was booming. Our growing industry was picking up international recognition and global esteem. We welcome millions of visitors to Indigenous-owned and operated lodges, experiences, attractions, and events. The industry employed almost 40,000 people within our communities and our Indigenous-owned businesses, and we provided almost $2 billion to the Canadian economy in direct GDP, something that we celebrated as Indigenous people and communities across this country. Unlike much of Canada's tourism sector, Indigenous tourism has been significantly hit especially hard, primarily because a lot of the marketing we did in this country for Indigenous tourism was very focused on international markets. As such, when March of 2020 hit, we saw a complete collapse for many of our businesses, far greater than what we might have seen across the averages we see in the rest of the tourism sector. During the peak, I guess, going back to that for a moment, Indigenous tourism dropped from 40,000 people working to 7,000. We didn't have bankruptcies. We just hibernated a significant number of businesses. And today we're now trying to continue to rebuild that, and we've seen some domestic support come back. Some examples I'd like to share: Aurora Village in Yellowknife, one of the most iconic experiences we have in this country, was 95% international visitation, completely almost had to shutter its doors within 3 months. And these are one of many examples. Here in British Columbia, Spirit Bear Lodge on the Northwest Coast also catered primarily to the international market, and that was lost overnight. So all these to say that from coast to coast to coast, Indigenous businesses in Canada have been exceptionally hard. Nearly 2 years, and here we are still living in a terrible dream. The summer of 2022 is upon us. We need urgent action now. We need all measures and restrictions removed. Otherwise, our industry will have a very difficult time managing yet another season lost. So it's time for us to come to an immediate halt. I stand here today with my colleagues from across the sector to call on the federal government to immediately change course and remove all remaining barriers. We know now that the pre-departure testing keeps visitors away. We've seen it. Although the U.S. market has opened up slightly, we just have not seen a return to any substantial visitation from that particular market as one of the key countries that's opened up. However, we are in a different phase of pandemic movement characterized by high vaccination levels now more than ever. So I just want to say this is critically important that we see these policy adjustments immediately. With that, I want to introduce my colleague, Walt Judas from Tourism Industry Association of BC.
Thank you, Keith, and good morning, everyone. I also want to thank the Canadian Travel and Tourism Roundtable for facilitating this discussion and for the important work that they do on our behalf. It was almost 2 years ago to the day that we held the BC Tourism Industry Conference in Victoria. We had about 450 delegates, and we sat in a room and listened to speakers talk about what was potentially to come with the COVID pandemic. It was just at the early stages, so nobody really knew what to expect. And in fact, our industry at that time was thinking that maybe this would be akin to SARS, so it would be 3 or 4 months in duration, something that we needed to endure, but certainly never believing that entire sectors of our industry would be completely shut down, such as meetings and events, because we pretty much haven't had that since March of 2020. Other sectors as well, including cruise, many in the adventure tourism coalition or industry, who normally welcome international guests, have also been virtually shut down for the past couple of years. We did what we were asked to do. As a sector, we followed the federal government's guidance to contain the spread of the virus that we knew very little about, but certainly we learned a lot about over the past 24 months. We were making moves to follow government's lead to protect our families, to protect visitors, to protect our neighbors, to protect our communities. We created extensive health and safety protocols as an industry to be sure that we were doing our part to contain the spread of the virus, even though we knew the impact on our sector would be devastating, and it certainly was. We had the confidence that the government was following the science, and that despite the devastating impacts on tourism and hospitality in British Columbia, we were doing what was right and what we needed to do at the time. The industry found very creative ways to ensure that we were staying afloat. Many businesses were in the process of rebuilding, or some had just started. They may not have survived. We certainly lost some businesses, but we did everything in our power to ensure that we carried on, and thanks to some government support, we were able to do that. At the same time, the situation is very different today. The industry is still struggling in a big way. We're struggling because, in spite of the fact that we're one of the most vaccinated industries, the federal government still has unnecessary restrictions in place that discourage international travel. So as we enter this next phase of the pandemic, we're seeing restrictions being lifted across the country, and those are appreciated. And last week, I was very encouraged to see government make some changes to travel restrictions, but it simply wasn't enough. These changes don't provide the certainty necessary to attract families and travelers back to British Columbia. So today, we encourage Ottawa to listen. We hope that Ottawa is listening. It's time to follow the rest of the world, to follow other provinces, and remove unnecessary testing requirements, in this case for international travelers who have been fully vaccinated, and let the tourism industry get back to work. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, the President of Travel Best Bets, Claire Newell.
Thank you, Walt. I'd like to thank my fellow speakers and also thank the Roundtable for all of their hard and important work and for facilitating today's event. I'd also like to echo the sentiment of Bridget, Keith, and Walt. Canada's travel and tourism industry is absolutely being left behind. As the rest of the world has come to terms with the fact that we have to live with COVID in the months and years to come, the federal government is clinging to antiquated restrictions to contain a virus that is already spreading in our communities. Very few industries have been impacted like our industry. And now we are one of the few that are left with stringent restrictions. And these restrictions are having a big impact on bookings. I can tell you that business travelers and families simply aren't willing to take the risk of their trip abroad being unnecessarily extended. For my business, I have seen a huge decline in bookings. We are still well below 50% of pre-pandemic levels, and I see the hesitancy that people have when they're making bookings while testing is still required. I know Canadians are ready to travel again. I hear it every single day, and I also know that the industry here is ready to safely welcome international travelers. Decisions are being made right now, and while it might be too late for March break, it is right now that decisive action needs to be taken by the federal government in order to save the summer season. It's right now that people are making their decisions on where they want to travel for the rest of the spring and summer season. Canadians have some of the highest vaccination rates in the world, and the restrictions in place need to recognize that. Places like the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, Greece, Denmark, and I could go on and on. Countries around the world have already removed pre-flight testing altogether and are now focusing on vaccination status of people wanting to visit. The pandemic, vaccination status, and available science have changed, and so too should the response and measures to keep Canadians safe while allowing the travel and tourism industry to reopen. Thank you for listening.
Me and my colleagues are happy to take any questions if you've got questions.
Outside of removing the testing, are there any other government supports specifically? Like all of you seem to be on the same page with that major change that you're after. Outside of that, what else can governments do, or provincial as well?
I'll let one of them answer.
Yeah, there's been a laundry list of sort of federal relief programs. So for Indigenous tourism, we've put out a roadmap 2022 to 2025 calling for $65 million with specific investments for $30 million in marketing to help rebuild these markets. It's going to, let's just assume that the borders will reopen with less restrictions. So we are going to have to recover. It's going to take us, as it stands today, Indigenous tourism, if we leave it the way it is right now, won't recover for at least 8 to 10 years from 2019 levels. With the right investments, we can recover back to that roughly $1.9 to $2 billion direct GDP by 2025. So we are calling for $65 million, $30 million of which is marketing, about $20 million in sort of development and helping our businesses retool. Market ready, the whole industry has changed so much because of the pandemic. Many Indigenous tourism businesses don't have the apparatus anymore that they would have needed to be competing. So what I'm saying is that visitors beyond the border challenges, purchasing it now has become very different. Everything is much more technological. A lot of our businesses have to update these sort of sales channel tools, and so there's a lot of upgrading on that. So these are the things that we're trying to recommend to the government. In addition, there's a number of other relief measures. The problem with all of this is that we come from a place, in my opinion, where government thinks they can throw a bit of money at a sector that's lost billions of dollars and it's going to recover. That's enough to stabilize it, and it's not. We are down, just to put the economics, we're losing right now no less than $1.2 billion each year right now in just Indigenous tourism, not the rest of our colleagues on this place. So there's no money that's going to, the government can't afford to put $1.2 billion back to stabilize. So we have to find other ways to really barrier removals. We need paying customers. So we have made recommendations.
While testing being eliminated is one of the immediate needs. One of the other things is to address the level 4 advisory for cruise ships coming into the ports. It's a matter of weeks that these cruise ships are coming into ports right across Canada, particularly here in Vancouver. It's going to have a huge impact. At the moment, ships will be allowed, but level 4 advisory is saying that Canadians are asked not to go aboard cruise ships, and it's got people extremely hesitant. A lot of Canadians love to do the Alaska run, and they're coming up to their final payment for the initial trips, and we're seeing a lot of people very hesitant to put down their final payment without that level 4 advisory. One of the other things that I've been noticing with the travel agency community in particular is that those cancellations are having huge impacts on bookings. But so too are the fact that testing is still there. Like I said when I was speaking, the hesitancy of people making bookings right now, they're very anxious to do it with the testing still in place. And while the government has had the wage subsidy in place and the rent subsidy in place, it is set to end March the 31st. And as of that date, I already know one travel agency that is closing because they will not be able to sustain it with the existing measures in place.
Thanks, Claire. It was the exact thing that I was going to mention as well is on the support programs. We really need them extended till the end of the summer at the very least. But there's one other thing that I think the government can do among many, and that is on the temporary foreign worker program. We have had a very difficult time as a sector attracting labor or workforce back into tourism and hospitality. We've lost a lot of people. That is probably one of the biggest barriers as far as recovery is concerned, is making sure that businesses have the requisite number of people that they need to operate again at full capacity. And one of the programs that has been helpful over the years is temporary foreign workers. It usually only represents about 5% of the workforce, but nonetheless a very important 5%. But in this case now, employers are stuck in a bit of a bureaucratic situation or process whereby several of their labor market impact assessment applications are in process and have taken months to move through what's needed to get those approvals. And consequently, you have many people in limbo, not knowing whether they can come to Canada to work for a couple of years, and this is particularly acute for those sectors that require highly skilled employees. So there's a backup there. Ideally, one of the things that government could do to help the tourism and hospitality sector is relieve us of the process for LMIAs, at least for this year, and allow the trusted employers who have used the program again to gain greater access or quicker access to those employees. Or conversely, another option would be to look at those workers that have been here before, highly skilled workers such as river rafting guides by way of example, that may have left for the winter and gone somewhere else to ply their trade. Allow them to come back and make it easier for them to come back to the companies or the industries or the sectors that they've worked in previously. So those are a couple of things.
Just maybe a final word on this. The federal government is right now working on its budget to be delivered this spring. And so we know that the travel and tourism industry will be the last to recover. If we look at just Vancouver alone, it lost $10 billion in its visitor economy in 2020 alone. And so we are calling for urgent action to save the spring and the summer tourism season. But looking beyond that, you know, this is also a high desired space for conferences and conventions. And when we look at business travel, we have jurisdictions around the world that are making those decisions right now about where they're going to hold those conferences. And when they look at Canada and they look at the obstacles in place, they will decide to go to other jurisdictions, which means we'll lose out for 2022 and beyond. And so it's imperative that action is taken now, not only for the urgent session of the tourism season right now, but also for longer term.
Are there any other questions in the room? Okay, with that, we'll head to the, one more question from BIV.
On the provincial restrictions, right now there still is the vaccine card, and the face mask requirement indoors. Any thoughts on that, on whether those should be removed or any timetable?
You know, just yesterday, Dr. Bonnie Henry and Health Minister Adrian Dix were responding to these questions. We see that restrictions are being eased across the country, and British Columbia is lagging in some ways. I was very heartened to see that Dr. Bonnie Henry is going to review these restrictions in the coming weeks ahead of spring break, and would urge the government and public health officers to follow the lead of other jurisdictions, so that when it comes to spring break travel for families and when it comes to for business travel, that we aren't the only jurisdiction that have restrictions in place. So would encourage the government to continue to follow the science, which is evolving, and to follow the lead of other provinces across the country.
Great, thank you. With that, we'll go to the operator.
Next question will be from Carolyn Harley at our local travel.
Hi, thanks for taking the question. This question's for Keith. Can you give us a sense of how important this is for Indigenous tourism, and what would it mean to the Indigenous travel and tourism sector to have the rapid test removed?
Well, I mean, well, first of all, I'll talk practically, as I said in my commentary. Anything to remove barriers to bring back more of the international visitors is critical to us. As I think I said in my comments, 70% of our actual paying customers were international. Not volume-wise, it was less people spent more money on Indigenous experiences across this country in 2019. We want to get back to that. We need to get back to that. It's not feasible for us not to get back to that. Otherwise, our businesses, whether it's community, First Nation, Métis, or Inuit-owned, or off-reserve, we desperately need this. So there's just a practical reality that we need to remove all possible barriers as soon as possible. Second, though, and I just say this to Canadians generally, Indigenous tourism, as we all work towards this national policy of reconciliation, I think a lot of people don't understand we're the industry that does provide that platform. So when Canadians want to learn about residential schools and the history, or they want to learn local Indigenous cultures, it's our businesses, our artists, our performers that provide that. And so when I think about the impacts right now, far beyond, I've talked a lot about dollars and cents today. The truth is we're talking about cultural sustainability, cultural revitalization, a country struggling to grapple with its challenged history. That I can't put a number to that. And so I hope, as we think about why these policies are important, that politicians, whether it's federal, provincial, or territory, realize that they impact each other in so many ways that they don't realize. And so we're trying to say at ITAC, these are reasons why we need to get on the consistent, same approach. Much to what the last question was. We sell Indigenous packages directly to consumers in Canada. And some of our biggest challenges is people are so confused still today about the different requirements within our own country. So selling to the world, we're all here talking today to remove that barrier, but we have to get consistent. Our industry is really being gutted. So again, I apologize, I went on a bit of a tangent there, but I cannot stress how critically important this is to the other social, cultural, and reconciliation agenda of this country that our industry provides.
Thank you so much.
Next question will be from Shannon Patterson at CTV News.
Oh, hi there. Obviously, you guys know that the U.S. still requires a rapid antigen test as well for air travelers coming from other countries. How realistic is it for Canada to lift this restriction while it's still in place in the United States?
Thanks for the question, Shannon. You know, when we look at travel and tourism and we look at where travelers want to go, we are on a global stage. So we look at what international jurisdictions are doing. The UK, Switzerland, Denmark, France, Italy, many jurisdictions across the globe are reducing those restrictions for fully vaccinated travelers. And Canada could be a leader in this way as well. So we encourage the federal government to really look at what is happening globally and to ensure that we do have a travel and tourism industry that is viable for this spring and summer and also into 2022 and 2023 beyond.
Follow up, Shannon?
again, I have to sort of ask the same question. This is our closest neighbor to the south. It feels like something that's going to be lifted in tandem. So are you also hoping and pushing for the U.S. to drop the rapid antigen requirement? Because I do feel like it is unrealistic that Canada would do it before our closest neighbor to the south. And at the very least, would you like to see it drop for the land border so people who are driving up from the U.S. don't need to be tested?
So yes, I just want to comment on this because I think yes to the land border as soon as possible. And again, I want to echo what my colleague said. It's not about, we understand that you're right. The impacts, U.S. and Canada will probably work in tandem, but what we're asking Canada today is to be a leader. We're not asking them to wait for the U.S. We're stressing to them that if you want to stabilize this industry, like I honestly believe that Canadians don't realize, or maybe policymakers, tourism affects 1 in 10 jobs in this country. It's that simple. We are a massive economic provider to this country. So we're asking Canadian officials and leaders to reconsider the impacts of this and be leaders on this initiative. That's what we're asking today, and I think hopefully, is it realistic? Perhaps not. But we as industry are dealing with thousands of employers every day that can't figure out how to pay their employees in the next 3 to 6 months. And Band-Aid programs will not save our sector. And we just need to stress it. If we want tourism to become robust and healthy, we are going to have to become leaders internationally in how we bring international visitors back to this country.
So if I can just follow that up, I think the main thing is that if airlines still wish to look at fully vaccinated travelers through a vaccine passport, that should be sufficient. And so that's another push that if we still need to take some health and safety measures, let's stay with that, that's fine, but the need for a rapid antigen test is just not necessary, as my colleagues have suggested.
Operator, are there any other questions?
Next question is from Michelle Smith at Michelle's Backpacking.
Hi, thank you so much, and thank you all so much for this really important information today. My question is, you're asking the federal government to urgently remove the pre-departure rapid antigen test. Why is this so urgent for the industry?
Just to reiterate the fact that so many jurisdictions around the world are already eliminating testing altogether and focusing on vaccination status instead. It's right now that people are making decisions on where they're going to be putting their tourism dollars, where they're going to be placing their convention business. People need to make decisions now, or they will not choose Canada. They will go somewhere else that it is easier to travel to. I would also like to just remind everyone that we had an exemption for short trips, that no testing was required for 72 hours prior to Omicron hitting, and it was put back in place mid-December. We would immediately like to see that put back in place so that at least for the 72-hour window, people would not need testing, and urgently requesting at the same time to remove testing completely to make it so much easier for people to consider, big and small, groups, individuals, businesses, to come back to Canada as a destination.
Follow-up?
No, thank you so much.
At this time, there are no further questions on the phone.
Great, thank you. That concludes the conference.